the Bible study class that's being live streamed on YouTube and probably some other places. We've got a Zoom group here today at noontime. Greetings, everybody. Thank you so much for allowing me to continue to walk alongside this group as we look through. Today, we're going to look at some case studies from the book of Judges. We're looking at biblical texts, but we're also looking at this book, Holy Imagination, written by Reverend Dr. Judy Fentress Williams. And we're going to be looking at, from this book, we'll be looking at pages 75 through 80. 75 through 80. We're going to be looking at case studies that the author has brought forward within the book of Judges. Obviously, you know, one of the things that we've talked about a lot is that in any particular group of biblical text or characters within the biblical text or stories that show up, that could be a study all of its own, right? We could look at the book of Judges and we could do that for a whole year, let alone just a couple of noontime sessions. So we're going to look at 4 of the Judges. I've got some ideas of some things that we might pull out and chat about, but I'm sure you do too. So if you are live streaming, if you're participating in this time together, but not on the Zoom call, we do have some folks that are keeping an eye on comments that come through in that way. So if you want to put comments into the through the YouTube channel or anything like that, we've got folks who are taking a look at that so that we can have them pulled into the chat here on the Zoom where I am, and we can have those be part of the conversation too. It's not a perfect system, but we're working with what we have, and I'm so grateful that we can meet even virtually. Would you join me in prayer, and then we'll dig into the particular text for today. Dearest God, thank you so much that you love us. Sometimes we don't even know what that word means. We don't know how to express it. We don't know how to receive it. We don't know how to recognize it. But we're so grateful that we, by faith, can come forward and say, you are with us because you love us. We proclaim this to different people in different ways throughout time, and we're so grateful that we can, by faith, accept that for ourselves this day. Would you create a sacred space here, virtually, where we all meet, but even in our individual spaces where we're joining in, and perhaps even in our mind, in our soul, in our spirit, and in our heart. That this time together would be so much more than just checking off a box. Yes, we did the 4 case studies, but that it would be a genuine meeting amongst human beings who've been created in the divine image. We're so grateful to have you here. Thank you so much. Could we be more than we could ever imagine to be because we met with each other and with you this day, even in the book of Judges? We pray these things in the name of Jesus, who is our Savior and friend. Amen. Okay. Oh, the book of Judges, my goodness. So a very, very, very quick recap, right? Because we've talked about this a couple of times. We've got that whole cycle thing that's going on through the book of Judges, right? The folk do some stuff that not cool, right? God's like, hey, I don't like that. Consequences come because they're still dealing with that theology from back in Deuteronomy. You do good stuff, you get good stuff. Right. And if you don't get good stuff, it must be because you're doing something wrong or you're a bad person. And then also they reverse engineered that. Right. If bad stuff's going on with you, we can look at you and be like, see, it's because blah, blah, blah. Right. Either because of who you are or what you did. They're still working with that. So in this Judges cycle, we're still working with a theology that says, hey, if bad stuff's going on, in this case, it's usually focused on we're not winning in battle, right? If that's not happening, it must mean that God is upset. And God is only upset when we're doing bad stuff. In this case, they're going to focus on whatever it means when they say worship other gods, right? And that can mean a whole host of things. Then they cry out because they can't take it anymore, right? They're trying to figure out what to do on their own. They can't figure it out. So they're like, yo, God, we need some help because we are at our limit. And then God sends a judge, right? And by looking at these case studies, we've already started to get the hint that these judges are different, right? There's a similar pattern, but the judges themselves are different, and they kind of work in and out of different vocational skills, right? And personal skills. And then the judge dies and the cycle starts all over again, right? It's almost as if they need an external force to be changing what's going on because they won't do it on their own, right? And that says something. And then the book of Judges just keeps getting worse and worse and worse and worse until we get to next week, where we talk about the culmination of like, hey, what in the world, right? So it'll be interesting when we chat next week about the culmination of Judges and the times we live in today. I'm not saying there has to be some direct connections. I'm just saying it'll probably bring forth a lot of conversation. That's all I'm saying. Okay, so we set the stage. We've got these different judges that are showing up, right? The case studies highlight both Othniel or Othniel, or however we're going to pronounce that. Usually the I would be like a long I. So Othniel, something like that, right? And he's the first. And we talked about last week how sometimes, I can't remember, was it Brother Carlos maybe brought this forward? I can't remember exactly, but somebody brought forward that that just because we have these judges listed doesn't mean that they were the only judges, you know? So it could be that he was the first actual judge, or the first judge that shows up in the text, right? So we've got him, and then we've got Deborah, and then Gideon, and then Samson. So let me open it up. Rather than me kind of set a framework or something like that. Is there any part of Judges, any one of these case studies that you'd like to start with? Something that surprised you if you read through the Holy Imagination text that you'd like to kind of wrestle with a little bit? If you could, you can just unmute and jump in, or you could put it in the chat if you'd like to do it that way.
I'd like to talk about Samson just a little bit.
Okay, great.
Because
excellent.
In modern times, I think Samson is the one that's easiest to identify with, because he was given he was given such a good start, but he threw it all away, and we see that in modern times.
Okay. So he threw it all away. Yeah. Say something more, but what's the next couple of sentences that come for you, Sister Marcia, after saying that?
Well, he didn't appreciate his heritage, and he just kind of said, I don't care what you tell me is right to do. I'm gonna go with this woman. She's not of our culture. She's not of our religion, but I love her. So he did that more than once. And it never came to a good end, you know. So.
Yeah. So at the end, he does in the biblical text, you know, he does do this kind of if we're going to talk in rom-com language, like this grand gesture, right? He does this like big thing to try and take care of some of the consequences of his actions, right? Does the big thing where, you know, the whole, you know, up against the building thing. So. But I deeply appreciate what you're bringing forward, right? Because you made an interpretive move, right? And I'm not, first, let me just say, I'm not judging the interpretive move, like this is a good one or a bad one. I'm saying it was just an interpretive move, right? He didn't appreciate his background, right? He didn't. What word did you use? You didn't use background.
I said his heritage and his culture.
Heritage, right? Heritage and culture, and those words are loaded words too, right? Like And these are good ways to have conversations about this, right? This creates depth to the conversation. We could just talk about like the way that this story has shown up in Sunday school and different, movies and whatever else, kinds of things. But when you use the interpretive language of not appreciating, and you use heritage and culture, now we're digging somewhere, right? This is you can't stay superficial and say those words, right? Because they mean something. So what does it mean to appreciate one's heritage and culture, especially as we're talking about what does it mean to follow God or to be in leadership in some sort of way that is godly, godlike, some would use the word obedient. Some would use the word of discipleship, that kind of thing. So would you say that, is there a back and forth for you with regards to not appreciating? Like if you appreciate your heritage and culture, does that automatically set you on the right path? Or is this just an aspect of something that stood out for you in a way that said, if you don't appreciate your heritage and culture, you're gonna fall away from that?
I guess a better word might be he didn't respect it.
Okay, now we're digging deeper. Woo, that's good.
He didn't care. He didn't care, about what he had been taught. He was a very independent thinker.
Okay.
And sometimes being an independent thinker gets you in deep trouble. Sometimes it can work out for you. It can definitely work out for you. But in his case, the way the story is recorded, it did not 100%.
I'd add another word in that he didn't appreciate the gifts that he was given. He used them in a good way.
Yeah, and we could also talk about heritage and culture as gifts too, right? I mean, there's like communal gifts and there's individual gifts, right? And I think once you move from appreciate to respect, we just dug deeper, right? Like those, you can't say those words without there being some sort of reaction to it, right? If you say like, dude just didn't notice, he was just inattentive, right? Yeah. That's kind of like up here.
Right. That's kind of weak. Yeah.
Right. It's like, yeah, but he just didn't notice, right? Like it was there, he was busy, and things just flew off from there, right? But then if you say like he didn't appreciate, now it's like, whoa, wait a minute. Like there's like a moral responsibility there, right? It's like or at least a societal kind of contract responsibility. Like you were offered these things and you just kind of stuck up your nose at it. Like you didn't even appreciate all that you had, right? But when we go here to respect, now we're talking something even more so, right? It's like you had the moral obligation to whatever, right? To use your gifts well, or to follow God, or whatever, to lead well, or what have you, right? If you're hold on 1 second. If you're disrespectful, if you're disrespecting it, right? Using that word alone is already creating a whole new way to think about this story, right? And again, I'm not saying like one over the other. I'm just saying the way that we get into this story can change very differently based on the ways that you've talked about it already, Sister Marcia. So I appreciate that. Sister Janine, please.
I was just going to say, I think he made assumptions that, this is just how it is, that I've got these things and I can just do these things and it'll all be just fine.
So one of the ways that we could look at this text is to read the biblical text and then start pulling out the parts of the biblical text that lead toward any of these interpretations, right? And then, a bunch of weeks ago, we were talking about different ways to look at biblical study, right? And one was, where do you find that in the text, right? That main question, where do you find that in the text? The second one is, how do you know that, right? Once you get to the interpretive move, it's like, well, how do you know that to be true? And not in a disrespectful way, not like, how do you know that to be true? Not kind of like that, but more like, what is it about your experience or perspective or learning or skill set helps you interpret it in that way, right? Then the third move is like, what does that mean for us today? Right? So Brother Charles has already also put something in the chat talking about Samson didn't seem to fit the pattern of the other judges. What made him a judge? And of course, we are going absolutely counter to the book, right? The book started with the first judge and moves towards Samson. We're like, we don't care. We're going to start with Samson and, we'll make it back if we make it back. Now, I will say, let's take a couple of minutes today, even if we focus all our time on Samson, which would be fine, right? Like there's no rule to that. But let's make sure we spend a little bit of time on Deborah, because Brother Carlos brought that up last time, and I want to make sure we touch that real quick. Okay, why don't we do this? Let's go to the biblical text. Let's go to the biblical text. Let's start there. Brother Charles, I want to, as we're reading through, I want to pull your question forward as well, okay? Like when we've read through Samson, like what is going on there? Like, how did you show up? Okay, where are we? We are at 13, Judges 13. Oh yeah, he got a long biblical story for sure. All right, you know what? We started talking about, Sister Marcia brought up his heritage and culture. So let's start with the birth of Samson. Let's start there. We probably won't have time to like read through the whole thing, but let's start with the birth of Samson. Let's read Judges 13, and then we'll pull back a little bit, and then we'll see where we jump back in. Okay? Can I have some volunteers, please, to read? Let's see, 1, 2, 3 different volunteers, please. If you could just identify yourself, that'd be great. Sister Janine is one. Brother Carlos is number 2. And a third one, please. I have my chat like over some. Oh, Brother Thomas, I saw you. Okay, so the first, Sister Janine, you'll do verses 1 through 7. Brother Carlos, 8 through 18. And Brother Thomas, would you do 19 to the end of chapter 13, please? So y'all can just jump right in. And we have it up on the screen too. Oh, Sister Janine, would you unmute, please? That's all right. We'll work it out.
Okay. The Israelites again did what was evil in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord gave them into the hands of the Philistines 40 years. There was a certain man of Zorah, of the tribe of the Danites, whose name was Manoah. His wife was barren, having borne no children. And the angel of the Lord appeared to the woman and said to her, although you are barren, having borne no children, you shall conceive and bear a son. Now be careful not to drink wine or strong drink, or to eat anything unclean, for you shall conceive and bear a son. No razor is to come on his head, for the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from birth. It is, well, that means that, I guess. It is he who shall begin to deliver Israel from the hand of the Philistines. Then the woman came and told her husband, a man of God came to me, and his appearance was like that of an angel of God, most awe-inspiring. I did not ask him where he came from, and he did not tell me his name, but he said to me, you shall conceive and bear a son, So drink no wine or strong drink, and eat nothing unclean. For the boy shall be a Nazarite to God from birth to the day of his death.
Thank you. Okay, Brother Carlos, please.
Then Manoah entreated the Lord and said, O Lord, I pray, let the man of God whom you sent come to us again and teach us what we are to do concerning the boy who was born. God listened to Manoah, and the angel of God came again to the woman as she sat in the field. But her husband, Manoah, was not with her. So the woman ran and told her husband, the man who came to me the other day has appeared to me. Manoah got up and followed his wife and came to the man and said to him, are you the man who spoke to this woman? And he said, I am. Then Manoah said, now when your words come true, what is to be the boy's rule of life? What is he to do? The angel of the Lord said to Manoah, let the woman give heed to all that I said to her. She may not eat of anything that comes from the vine. She is not to drink wine or strong drink or eat any unclean thing. She is to observe everything that I commanded her. Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, allow us to detain you and prepare a kid for you. The angel of the Lord said to Manoah, if you detain me, I will not eat your food. But if you want to prepare a burnt offering, then offer it to the Lord. For Manoah did not know that he was the angel of the Lord. Then Manoah said to the angel of the Lord, what is your name, so that we may honor you when your words come true? But the angel of the Lord said to him, why do you ask my name? It is too wonderful.
Thank you. Brother Thomas, please.
So Manoah took the kid with the grain offering and offered it on the rock to the Lord. To him who
Brother Thomas, I think your screen is frozen. Oh.
Okay,
Could you start with verse 20, please?
Okay, verse 20.
Please. When the flame went up.
Let me go back and find it here. Okay, when the flame up toward heaven from the altar, the angel of the Lord ascended in the flame, and they fell on their faces to the ground. The angel of the Lord did not appear again to Manoah and his wife. Then Manoah to his wife, we shall surely die in God. But
Oh no, Brother Thomas,
You're broken again.
we're catching some words and not some other words.
Okay, you would start 22.
22, that'd be great. Please.
And Manoah to his wife, surely die, for we have not seen God. For we have seen God. But his wife said to him, if the Lord had meant to kill us, he would not have accepted a burnt offering and a grain offering at our hands, or shown us all these things, or now announced to us these things as these, such things as these, and named him Samson. And the Lord blessed. The Spirit of the Lord began to stir him in Dan between Zor and Eshtaol.
Great. Okay, so we've got someone with an origin story of before his birth, right? So there are all these expectations placed on him before he's even born. So one of the ways that we can think about Samson's story and perhaps even his actions is to think about what it means to come up in such a way that folks already have all of these expectations on you, right? So one of the things I'm thinking about is that many times people will rebel against that as soon as they feel they have enough power to do so. So sometimes it's like when young people go to college, right? If they go away to college and they're staying in college, like, then they're like, hey, I have some freedom. I don't want to go to church every Sunday, whatever. I don't know. I'm just saying things for like folks that grow up in church. I don't really know because I didn't grow up in church. So like part of what I'm talking about is the ways that I hear folks talk about church life, right? I hear many, many, many stories. I was dragged to church by blah, 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 whoever, right? Some family member or something, whatever. We all had to go to church forever. And we stayed there all day and I just couldn't understand it. I was like, why are we sweating or whatever, right? Then they get to a place where they have a little bit of freedom. Maybe it's college, maybe something else, right? And then no church. It's like the opposite. Like they did all the church over here and then none of the church. Then they have kids, right? And then they're like, hey, you know what? Church is a good place for kids. So let me get back to church. I hear it's not everyone's story, but I hear it enough to know that it's a pattern, right? It's like it happens to more than one person. So I'm wondering, right? We just looked at what is in the text, right? All these expectations. Then what I'm doing is I'm putting number 2 into place. How do you know that, right? I'm making an interpretive move and asking, because I don't know, it's not like I can call Samson up. I wonder if in Samson making these decisions in his love life or otherwise, and is he rebelling against all of these external expectations that have been placed on him his whole life? Like, I wonder how many times he heard that story, right? Okay, Ma, you couldn't drink strong drink. I get it. Blah, 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 right? Or every time they have, a family get together or a family reunion. It's like, let's trot out the Samson story again. Oh, Ma, killing me, right? But there's all this pressure. So talk to me about that. What do you think? You think there's any validity there? Or because we also have on the table, we also have Sister Marcia's, he didn't appreciate or even respect his heritage and culture, right? So that's intention there too. What do y'all think about that? I saw Sister Marian nodding her head.
Yeah, I grew up always having to be a credit to my family, my race, my school, my whatever. Yeah, I think that's a wonderful way of looking at Samson. And I've always loved the movie.
Samson's stepping out. He's like taking ownership of his own life.
Well, actually, the thing about the movie I loved was Delilah. But
see, right, and that's a whole right. That's a whole other part of this conversation, right? There are many stories throughout the Bible and history that talk about women being the downfall of dudes, right? So, and part of that is patriarchy, right? Part of it is like, how do folks protect their power, their character, whatever? And just a human tendency is to put the blame on someone else and to put the blame on someone with less official power than you, right? So it's like, well, it was, whose fault?
the woman.
Right? And so that's in play too. Sister Tracy, did I see you coming off mute?
Yes, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi. No, I was agreeing with you and the other young lady before me. That happens a lot with people that are only children. Everything is expected of them. They got to hit every button. I have an only child, and I've heard that. I've heard that from other people that are only children too. So that also comes into play, where they feel like they got to hit this, hit that, and make sure, like the stories of the family, such as this, that I got to hit that mark, do the college, do whatever it has to happen. So, yeah. just in agreement. Thank you.
Sister Tracy, stay off mute for a second, because I want to chat with you about something. So
Okay.
is this, so what, one, I'm not an only child, and two, I don't have children. So I don't have like a direct perspective here, but I'm wondering what came to my mind when you were saying that is like, do you think it's like because folks are kind of pouring all of their hopes and dreams
Yeah.
like into the only child?
Yes.
Okay.
That happens. Definitely. I mean, of course, you know, for the most part, it's well-meaning. You want them to, you know, achieve, you know, certain goals. I speak for myself. I wanted her to not face some of the things that I have faced. I wanted her to have the direction to do things and get things accomplished that I didn't get a chance to. That happens. You do feel that, honestly, and you do have those hopes and dreams that they can go much further than you. But that can be a little bit of a drag on one person, one child, or you know, if it's a boy, it's a girl, what have you. They feel like, okay, I'm doing this. Now, what next? What I got to do this? I mean, it worked out fine, thank God. But they do feel those things. If I have my honest talks with my daughter, I see that, you know, and she has mentioned, you know, that it's a little bit of a pressure. So I think it's not hard to understand that they may have that kind of rebellion. It's not a stretch to understand that.
You know, could I add to that?
Sure.
I have one of my sons was learning disabled, and he went to the lab school, and one of his friends was right close by, and I remember talking to the mother one time, and she was saying, you know, my husband went to Harvard, and I really want David to go to Harvard, and I'm really upset about this. And I'm thinking, oh my God. And then the psychologist talked to the parents group one night and just said, you know, if you put what you want for your son to be an extension of what you want, you are causing that child a lot of problems. So this is psychologically, it is very damaging. So many times.
Yeah, I mean, and there's also like, there's cultural attachments to all of this too, right? There are gender, whether you're an only child, whether you're the first child, whether you're the baby child, race has a lot to do with how certain expectations are put forward, what expectations are coming from within, what are coming externally, what depending on how folks are the first of something, can also depend on, like, you know, all of the expectations to open doors for other folks are also there, right? The biblical text started with that Samson's mom was barren. So it's setting the stage not only for the kind of miracle story, because that's a trope in the Bible, right? They couldn't get pregnant, then they got pregnant, something huge happened, right? That's a biblical trope. That's a way to tell the story so that God's power can show up, so that the miracle can show up, that kind of thing, right? So there's that. Then there's the expectation thing, right? This once barren woman then had a child, and then it was like, this child's going to be, right? All of these wonderful things are going to happen because this child has been born. Then all the expectations then on top of Samson, right? And Samson is, you know, a dude that's getting some play, right? He's not, folks are paying attention to Samson. So then what does Samson do with that, right? And that can, you know, in this particular story, they're talking about different women, right? But Samson isn't the only biblical dude with a whole bunch of women, right? He's not the only one. So they're bringing this forward for a very particular reason. And again, they're equating women who are foreign born with worshiping other gods, right? The focus for them in the book of Judges is, hey, if we keep worshiping other gods, God is not going to be with us when we're in battle, right? Which is why most of the judges, the kind of formulative idea of a judge is someone who's going to get folks through battle and successfully, because that's going to be the pinnacle of understanding of whether or not they're doing the right thing, right? And so one of the questions of judges, even though it hardly comes up in biblical studies about it, is how do you know you're doing the right thing? How do you know? Is it something that comes internally? Is it something externally pressured upon us? How do we know we're following God? This is a question that we brought up in Joshua too, right? Joshua as well, right? That like, if you go into a land and snatch it from folks who are already living there and then put the name of God on top of it, what do we do with that morally? How do we make moral, ethical, character-driven decisions in a way that lines up with who we proclaim to be, right? Just if I say, well, I'm a God follower, or I'm a Christ follower, or I'm a Christian, or whatever we say, and then basically we just do whatever we're going to do and then slap God's name on it, does that really mean that we're acting in a way that is morally righteous just because we say that, right? Many Christians would say, I want to live righteously, right? I want to live righteously, but there's no direct set of, top 10 things you got to do that, right? One of the comments that came up in the chat was talking about like kind of the surprise of folks meeting their partner or their spouse in a bar, right? And part of what that comes from is a long-standing tradition within certain religious groups that like you don't go to bars, or you don't drink, or you don't do this, or you don't do that, right? My feeling as a minister, you're just going to get Michelle right now, okay? Like this is just Michelle talking. But I don't think God cares about that. I'm putting my feet down in the sand, on the line, over the line, wherever I'm doing. I'm just saying, I think there are bigger things that God is worried about than that. But I know there are a lot of people who hold that line, right? Hold that line about like, you just don't drink, or you don't go to bars, or you don't go to clubs, or you don't do this and you don't do that and whatever. And these lists many times are stemming from this drive of how do we live righteously, right? How do we live righteously? Now, I think Michelle, again, I'm only speaking for myself, Michelle thinks that there are other places we can stake our righteousness. And that if we get too caught up in who's swearing and who isn't, or who's in a club and who isn't, or how somebody's dancing or whatever, right? We're missing some of the major places that we could be experiencing and generating righteousness, right? So, all right, y'all. What do y'all think about that? All the YouTube folks are like, I wish I was on that Zoom call right now.
I agree with Michelle.
Thank you. But I mean, here's the thing. This is what we're wrestling with, right? Like how do we decide? How do we decide? How do we decide? Right? And so here we've got Samson, who's coming up under a lot of expectation. And we're assuming a lot of pressure around that, right? Because the way that they talk about how the mom has to be, they're talking about how the mom is going to stay pure as a vessel of this Nazarite, so that the Nazarite can be pure, right? They're talking about cleanliness. They're talking about purity, right? Now we have a lot of conversations around purity culture, right? There's all sorts of conversations about whether folks, Christians are allowed to have sex before they get married, and what that means, and different rules for women and different rules for men, and all sorts of things that play around that, right? We're still trying to figure out what does it mean to live in a righteous manner, right? And the secondary question to that, sometimes primary, is what does it mean to live as a righteous person, right? We want to be whatever. Like right for the sense of right isn't necessarily the case, but most of us are going to be like, I do want to be a good person. So then we're going to be looking for things, looking for decisions to help us live into that and out of that. So now we've got Samson, who's got a little bit of freedom. And Samson decides to take option with many women, right? And foreign women to boot. And then folks are like, hey, don't do that. Now, why is Samson a judge? Based on what we know about judges and how judges are normally the folks who are bringing forward military success. How does Samson, other than his Nazirite status, which has already kind of set him apart, like, hey, he's a good one, right? Everybody else is acting all sorts of ways, but we got this Nazirite over here. What in the text, it comes later, what in the text, we're now like at chapter 15, or maybe even sooner. What's in the biblical text?
Are you speaking of when he kills the lion?
Yeah, where do you find that? Where's that in the text?
Chapter 14, verse somewhere in 14.
Why don't you start reading at verse 5? 14:5.
Then went Samson down and his father and his mother to Timnath, and came to the vineyards of Timnath, and behold, a young lion roared against him. And the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon him, and he rent him as he would have rent a kid, and he had nothing in his hands, but he told not his father or his mother what he had done. And he went down and talked with the woman, and she pleased Samson well. And after a time, he returned to take her, and he turned aside to see the carcass of the lion, and behold, there was a swarm of bees and honey in the carcass of the lion. And he took thereof in his hands and went on eating, and came to his father and mother and gave them, and he gave them, and they did eat, but he told not them that he had taken the honey out of the carcass of the lion.
Okay, so here is, to me, here's a little more evidence that he's got a lot of expectations placed on him, but he's exercising his freedom, right? He's in a spot he shouldn't be in, based on the expectations, right? Not necessarily anything else, but based on these expectations and this big concern about worshiping other gods and that be connected to foreign women, right? He's in a spot and the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him in the spot where the expectations don't think he should be. Literally, the Spirit of the Lord comes upon him and he's able to take out a lion. A lion. So what does that say about that theology, right? If you're able to do good things, if you're able to survive in battle, in this case, it's a lion. If God is with you, you'll succeed.
But
if God,
there's a challenge to the theory.
Yes. So one of the things that's happening even within the story, right, is like Samson is caught between God using him. The Spirit of the Lord falls upon him. Hey, Samson, I want you to do some stuff, right? This is kind of a precursor to his judgedom, right? Because he's doing stuff that the everyday dude is not doing, right? The everyday person is not doing. But he can't tell his parents. Because in order to tell his parents can be like, what brought you down there? And he's like, oh, by the way, there was a girl there. And, there was some time together. It worked out really well for me, Mom and Dad, but I know you won't like it, right? And then he's like, and I even got the spoils of war, this honey right? That showed up in a lion's belly out of nowhere, right? And even though I'm going to give you this gift of this great thing that happened, I'm still not going to tell you where it went down, because all these expectations and all this stuff are right. He's trying to figure out what's going on here. For me, it's not as simple as just saying like he's a good guy or a bad guy, or he did this thing and, you know, he's just like the evil character, right? Even within his own story, he's kind of mimicking the story of Judges, right? Because the story of Judges is like everybody's acting some kind of way, and then there's going to be some consequences, and then, you know, someone's going to come in, right? He's walking that. He's trying to figure out what does it mean for him to just be. But he's got all of these expectations on top of him. And yet, even though he's in the spot that the expectations would say is wrong, the Spirit of the Lord was on him. And he was able to do a feat that the folks around him couldn't do. So, Brother Charles, I think this is the beginning of like setting him up to be a military victor, you know, victorious in military kinds of ways, fighting, you know, that kind of thing, being successful there. And usually that's what's going to, because even in the story of Deborah, right, it's still a military victory, even though she's not the one that does it. She's the one that says, hey, this is the way it was supposed to go, and you said no. So now it's going to happen this way, right? And it's still a military victory. So Deborah's got a different way of judging. She's much more known for her prophecy, or being a prophetess, and judging in that way, and being able to like mediate things. Whereas Samson is more of a like hands-on. Othniel, the first judge that's listed in the book, is kind of like the prototype for what a faithful judge is. We don't even know anything about him. It's just like he's the first one. And you know why he was great and things went well? Because he did what God said. Even though we don't have a huge amount about that either, right? Woo! Oh, Lord. What are we going to do now? Where are we going now? He's got Samson defeats the Philistines. All sorts of back and forth about Delilah, right? There's all this back and forth about that. And if we look at it through the interpretation of worshiping other gods, then to a certain extent, we can extrapolate it out and talk about what does it mean for us to go back and forth, right? What does it mean for us to really wrestle with what we want, our humanness, and what we've been taught is faithfulness to God, right? And what are the consequences to those things? Like, one of the ways we can think about what does it mean to be a righteous person, or to act in righteousness, is to look at the consequences of those things. If the consequences of the things of me like holding very, very tightly to a very strict list of do's and don'ts actually harms somebody, then I'm going to swing toward the person rather than the list. But if you asked me when I first became a Christian, I would have swung toward the list. Because honestly, I didn't trust myself enough to go beyond whatever somebody gave me. I didn't know what it meant for me to live as a Christian. Because I hadn't tested anything out. I was in my mid-20s. I didn't know anything. Not because I was in my mid-20s. I literally just didn't know anything about Christianity. You know what I mean? So I had to learn that stuff. But I lived in a very, very rigid way for a long time, because my first exposure to Christianity was in a very rigid expression of it. So it was like, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this, you can't do this. And I had to come to a place where I started having some very real conversations with God, like, hey, how do I honor my humanness and honor that I've been created in your image and honor that I have this call on my life, right? That's just kind of real talk there. Brother Carlos, were you going to jump in? We could probably
I'm thinking that could be, I was thinking that could be all of our stories. I mean, because I was raised in the church, but in the beginning, my thinking was really concrete, you know, good or bad. And for a long time, until you get life experiences, do you start to see some of the gray areas. So, I mean, it took me many years what you did in a shorter period of time, but I think all of us can say we went through that, you know, that story.
So, Carlos, let me ask you this, Brother Carlos. How do you determine when a gray area is just permission to do whatever you wanted to do? No pressure, just answer for us all. No, just playing. I'm just kind of throwing it out there, but like, would you respond first?
I like when you said consequences. That's one of it. Yeah, for me and for others. Right now, my struggle is this just for me, or am I thinking about the community? And
say more.
When I hit a gray area and I pray on it and don't know which way to go, when I wake up, if God hasn't given me the answer right there, then I have to look at, if I do this, or if I vote for this, if I decide to work for this, why? What's the motivation? Is it for me, or is it for the larger community? That helps me sometimes.
Yeah. So Brother Carlos, you've also brought up motivation. So we've got consequences on the table. We have personal and communal on the table. Now we've also got motivation, right? And a lot of times in justice work, it's the idea of like intention and outcomes comes up a lot. And it's like, if you didn't intend for that to be wrong, like some folks really hold on to that very tightly and say like, well, I didn't mean for that to be whatever it was. So I, just show me grace or whatever, right? The opposite part of that argument is it doesn't matter what you meant. The reality is the outcome is still here, right? The outcome, the problem, the injustice, the oppression, whatever it happens to be, is still a problem. And so the main thing is to focus on the consequence of the outcome so that you can attend to those. And then you kind of like go back and work on the intent or motivation as you're doing it. Because some of the problem is when we focus only on intention and motivation, then really what we end up doing, especially if we're in a communal setting, is we end up waiting for the most stubborn mind and heart to come along. Right? That person can just sit there as long as they want and be like, well, I didn't mean it. I didn't know. I didn't intend for that that wasn't my intention. Right? And then like the consequences that are harming people continue. Right? So if we're looking at Samson as a judge, then we're saying, okay, there are certain consequences that are happening based on him trying to figure out what's going on, right, with his own life. And then at the end, he comes in and he says, okay, I'm making this decision, even to my own detriment. I'm going to make this decision for the benefit of the communal, right? And Brother Charles, this might be another place why Samson is considered a judge, right? He's putting himself in a place where he's seeking the communal good, right, on behalf of the people and God, right, to come in and create something that allows the consequences to shift.
Can I just say,
please?
Let me tell you why I wrote that.
Yeah.
When I went back on page 73, look at the cycle.
Yeah.
People did things that God saw was evil, namely worshiping other gods in America. And the Lord became angry and allowed them to be defeated by their enemy. Okay, that's good. The people groaned under their oppression. The Lord raised, here's where I had a problem. The Lord raised up judges who, as tribal chieftains, rescued them from their oppression. And then things were peaceful.
Yeah.
So it seemed like the part of Samson to me seemed like a personal story of just having a lot of fun, because he didn't kill all the Philistines. Because when we look later, David they were still battling the Philistines. So I didn't think he filled his role. He just killed a few that were in the temple that were, or wherever the place was. That's the reason I said he didn't fit the pattern of the other judges that were successful.
And what is this helps us think about another question. What does it mean to be successful? Like, what does it mean to be successful? What does it mean to be faithful? Because we talked about this being a pattern, right? But we also talked about what happens when something doesn't fit the pattern. And we also talked about the book of Judges getting worse and worse and worse. And Samson is down here, right? So, we're moving towards some really dire stuff, and that cycle is going to be moving quicker, right? The people go back to evil quicker because that cycle is amping up. But I deeply appreciate that you brought that up, because I think we need to keep those things in mind. Otherwise, we sanitize what's going on in the biblical text to make it fit. And that's usually not the way lives work anyway, right? That's not our experience of life in that way. Brother Carlos, what can we say about Deborah?
Ooh, okay. Marsha, what can we say about Deborah?
Sister Marsha.
Said we didn't talk about Deborah, so I brought it up to make sure.
Oh, okay. All right. Sister Marsha, please. Deborah's got her own. She got a song. And this is the song is, isn't this the one where the song predates the events, right? So it's like, what does it mean when you have a song or a hymn or a piece of like history, something that predates a story about it? You can ask a couple things, right? One is like, do you is this an instance of having something within the tradition that you get reminded of when somebody steps up and does something, right? You get like that memory of it and then you pull it up. Or could this be that this was such a part of their history and culture and heritage that people began to live into it, right? Like it's there and it's like, hey, that thing, right? And then folks are like, what, this is a way that I could live, right? It becomes part of our subconscious. We get socialized with it and it becomes part of who we are. And then eventually we get to this place where somebody's living it out in particular ways, right? Even beyond the conversation about like, just a straight up prophecy, like this thing is going to happen and then it happens, right? There are different ways that we get socialized. The book of Judges, some commentaries talk about how the book of Judges has the most women named in that book. And there's all different kinds of ways that women show up, right? Women show up as the heroine. Women show up as the top leader, the actual judge. Women show up as being violated. One of the places that our strategy of going through these books is not going to touch on is Judges 19. And that's a brutal story. It's brutal on a whole bunch of different levels. And one of the reasons that it's there is it is meant to highlight how bad things get. I know that next week we're going to talk about kind of the culmination, the things fall apart part of the story. And it does mention chapter 19, but it doesn't set it up as a case story. you know, and probably one of the reasons for that is because it is so brutal. But we're gonna talk about what happens when the book of Judges gets to its culmination point. Part of it is literary, right? It's part of the way that the story gets told, the story of what happens when folks are just out for themselves and doing whatever they think, right? That's the point of this book, to get to the place where it's like, hey, now there's a political point to this book too, right? It wants to help to tell the story between Joshua and Samuel, right? How is it that this group of people starts here and ends up here, right? How is it that this group ends up going from just following God and having a tabernacle to getting a king, right? What is a transition? So there's got to be something. And one of the ways that they're trying to explain it is, well, when left to the people, they keep busting out this crazy cycle, right? And then not only does it get bad within the cycle, but then it gets worse and worse and worse and worse. So I'm going to say one of those things that shows up on like some of those lists of do's and don'ts. So many whatever years ago, I got a tattoo. And the way that they did the tattoo is that, you know, they put the ink in with the needle, right? Like that. And then they go back and they got to refill it. Then they come back, right? The tattoo took 2 hours long. And at the 1 hour mark, what had happened was, like, when they go in like that, and then they come back and they'd fill it up. In that meantime, while they were filling it up, the pain would subside, right? It was like harsh pain, then it would subside. But over that first hour, the period of recovery got shorter and shorter and shorter. The pain lasted longer and longer. And at that 1 hour mark, the pain never went away, right? Pain, actual pain, residual pain, while they were getting the more ink. And then they come back and just more pain on top of the residual pain for that final hour, right? Just got worse and worse and worse and worse until it wasn't. That's what's happening in the book of Judges. Each cycle is bad, but then every cycle is getting worse and worse and worse, where there's less of that recovery period, and the pain is getting worse and worse and worse, right? And again, part of that is a political story, part of that is literary, but part of it is how we can understand, you know, what does it mean for us to make decisions about how we're going to interact with each other, and also just understand our relationship with God. Thank you all so much for an awesome conversation. I know that some of the folks are going to be away for August, and some of the time Sister Janine's going to be away for a while, so she may not be able to join us. Different folks will be coming in and out because of vacations or work projects or digital cleanses or whatever else. But we will continue to meet at 12 o'clock. I'll be here for the 12 o'clock until the end of the summer. And also the 7 o'clock class, the 7 p.m. class on Wednesday still continues. There'll be one tonight. And so thank you all so very much for continuing to come and walk alongside each other as we stumble and wrestle through the books of the Bible. Holy Imagination is a wonderful theology book, and just to be in the presence of each other. Thank you all so very much. Thank you, God, for joining us. We're so grateful that we could be in your presence as well, and that you're so faithful to come every time. In Jesus' name.